Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone so far. Thanks for the panelists prior to this. So today what we're going to cover is some of the carrots and sticks. So the theme of this is really to look at some of the incentives that are available, but in light of some of the changes that have been made. So as many of you know, the Canadian government has net zero ambitions for 2050. In order to accomplish those ambitions, they've set out a series of strategic priorities, which include things like decarbonization, sustainability, renewable energy, looking at stuff like electrification. But in order to sort of achieve this objective, they really set out sort of two differing sides. The first being, as we've talked about previously, some of the pollution pricing framework and the regulatory requirements that are sort of part of this. And then in addition to that, we've got a series of investment tax credits that really form the backbone of incentivizing investments in Canada. Those investment tax credits really cover everything from extraction and processing of critical minerals that are needed for this transition to a clean economy, covers the manufacture of clean economy, or the manufacture of technologies in Canada for that are zero emission. It covers electrification, so renewable energy. It covers bringing clean electricity across provincial borders. Carbon capture, we did talk about that in the last panel a little bit. It covers clean hydrogen production, and then sort of this last sort of lingering one, this electric vehicle supply chain investment tax credit. So all of these credits are refundable. They range anywhere from 10 to 60%, sort of depending on the technology. And today we're really going to look at sort of that interaction between, how does the pollution pricing and regulatory sort of tie in to the investment tax credits and the incentives that are available to businesses, and really help drive and bring down sort of that financial burden and reduce the cost of capital. So with me, I have Dan Jankovic, Pierre-Luc Labelle, and I've got Jeff Schwartz that are going to help me unpack this over the next 25 minutes. So let's get going with this. And really, Pierre-Luc, the first question is really for you. So as we sort of talk about these incentives and the debt fund that you sort of support and some of the financing, strategic financing, how have you seen these investment tax credits really drive investments in Canada? And how do you think that this is actually approaching or helping Canada meet its net zero initiatives?
Right. Well, first and foremost, the most challenging part about these ITCs is not necessarily changing the investment strategies, which is rather immediate, because the companies, they see there's an opportunity to either decrease their capital expenditures budget or strategy, or even improve or increase their investment and get a better yield for that with this refund. And a lot of the major corporations are trying to capture this window. Problem is, for now at least, is improving the capital structure and the capital raise strategies behind this, because tax credits, they don't do everything. They get you a refund for your capex strategies, but now you have to rethink on how you're going to build your capital structure, how you're going to implement your product, how you're going to implement your project, and how you're going to finance the first activities in order to get there and get these carrots. And this is changing. And for it to work, you don't just have to put more equity. Objectives of the tax incentives is to allow more projects to start by decreasing the amount of equity required for each project, and therefore having more projects. If you just put more equity at the beginning of the project and just get a refund afterwards, that's not how it works. You need to get a capital structure that allows you to start the project faster, and I think we'll get there maybe in a moment.
Yeah, okay. No, and I think that makes sense. I mean, thinking about these credits, a lot of them are paid out once the asset is available for use, and sort of that there's a timing difference in respect to that. I mean, there are challenges associated with some of these investment tax credits, and maybe, Dan, maybe you could talk about some of the challenges that you've seen with your clients and sort of as they try to embark on this, and maybe the opportunities that really follow through this.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the opportunities are obviously getting the cash, excuse me, from the feds, and so that's a key. Nobody would be doing, or very few people would be engaging in these projects without these federal tax credits, right? So Canada, like the leading OECD trading partners and allies, have basically decided to transition us into this energy transition, clean energy space, right? Like, so we are all participants in this project, semi-global project. If you include, you know, China, India, Russia, etc., they're not really into this, but the rest of us are, and we are into this because the governments are saying we will give you anywhere from 15% credit in a clean electricity project to 60% in a carbon capture project, right? Like, so we are saying to you, we're going to social engineer this thing and give you the money on behalf of the taxpayers to participate in this thing. So that's really what's going on, right? We are all here because there's a lot of money involved, and people can get these credits if they meet these conditions, right? The challenges are multiple, however, right? Like, so it's not always as rosy as it seems initially. So, for example, what are these challenges? We have structuring issues. Do I form a partnership? Do I have a corporation? What do I do? Because there are certain eligible entities for different projects here, different credits, and so there are issues with that. If you have indigenous groups, if you have crown corporations, if you have pension funds, right? Like, they're all circling around this, again, because the dollars are involved. So structuring is challenge number one, and, you know, every project will have a different structure. Second, labor requirements. This is the first time in Canadian history that we have a labor requirement attached to some tax credit or incentive or whatever, right? So unless you meet certain prevailing wages or apprenticeship requirements for this, your credit will be reduced by 10%. So you have to carefully monitor that the workers for a particular project are getting paid adequately, okay? What else? There's greenwashing legislation now, which it's very fascinating because you have the one arm of the federal government saying, please go do this. And for some of these credits, like the carbon capture, utilization storage credit, you actually have to do annual reports, and there are certain reporting requirements that you have to disclose in order to claim these credits or avoid the penalties, okay? On the other hand, there's now new legislation that says that if you misrepresent or engage in certain misleading behavior, if you will, to promote yourself, and you cannot substantiate it using some vague terms like international reporting methodology and things like that, then you will be subject to some severe penalty, right? So the left hand doesn't really know what the right hand is doing, because you have the bureau, the Competition Bureau involved, and then you have the finance people, right? Now, in fairness, this is all new territory even for the feds in Ottawa or Washington and Brussels, et cetera, right? But it's a challenge because a lot of energy companies that are genuinely into this are now removing all kinds of statements from their website because they don't want to be subject to some litigation. And I'll just stop here by adding that on this greenwashing point, private parties, starting in June of 2025, can bring forward claims. So that's very unusual for us because up to now, it will be up to the competition tribunal to say, hey, company X, you misbehaved or you misrepresented. But now, starting next summer, you're going to have private parties, public interest groups, you know, are going to be checking your websites and saying, that's not right, and I'm going to bring a claim and seek leave from the tribunal, right? So it's going to be very interesting how that develops. So I would leave that third challenge, greenwashing. I'll stop at that point.
Yeah, no, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's, in some ways, that is the panel. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about that push and pull between the two, right? And so, Jeff, maybe kind of on top of that, you have a different perspective when you're looking at sort of your projects that you're working with some of your customers, whether those are sort of residential or businesses. we know that there's incentive structures out there. We've just talked about some of the incentives related to the larger corporations, businesses that are undertaking these large energy transition projects. What are some of the I guess challenges and opportunities that relate to some of the smaller clients? So businesses or individuals, whether those are incentives at the municipal, provincial, or federal level.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I can only laugh because you think Sesame Street, one of these things don't look like the others. That's for sure me today. So the content's a little bit different, but what I wanted to share is sort of the residential commercial example. We finished a commercial project recently, 65 heat pumps, 100 head-end solutions. And what I can tell you is it is not only complex, but it creates a lot of time and effort from all of the parties involved to access the credits, but also to understand what credits are available. But I wanted to flip the switch for a second. Every person in the room is a homeowner. I think most people are homeowners, or you want to be homeowners. In Toronto, maybe not everyone's a homeowner yet. But one of the challenges in being a homeowner, Kim said it well, trust, collaboration. Our team's sitting in the room, and it's fun. Our co-founder's in the front. He's wearing his hat, his T-shirt. He's one of the first people and one of our first customers that went completely off-grid. So completely off-grid, 20 kilowatt system, solar, but navigating the entire ecosystem of federal, municipal, provincial is not only hard, but we hear from customers all the time, they don't even know what to do. They go on a website, they fill out a form, nothing happens. Someone reaches back to them, they're denied, they don't understand. And so, part of what I find is not our mission, but part of what we're trying to do is help customers make better decisions, because we know sustainability can be affordable for them. We know there are rebates and credits available. We had a project that we did yesterday. We were the first in Canada to bring in an Anesi product, but it's a thermal heat pump that is a game changer. We're the first to do it because it's the most complicated thing you have ever seen, and we had to crane the product over a residential house. You can access the credits, but they needed a whole bunch of hand-holding. The government has dollars, but you can't find them. And so I'll just close by saying, whether it's commercial or whether it's residential, there is stackability. There is illegible stackability, but most importantly, it's very confusing for homeowners, but it's equally confusing for small businesses. And what we find is when we're sitting with a smaller business, we're trying to help them through the project. And if we weren't helping them through the project, they wouldn't even be able to start the project. So unlike many in the room that might be in larger organizations, I think one of the challenges is transparency and trust. So our number one position on this is helping to educate. And back to you, Martin, I think that's one of the challenges we find, not just with ITCs, but in the incentives, is how do you navigate a system that's a little bit more confusing than it needs to be?
Yeah, and I think those incentives, there's, as you sort of mentioned, there's sort of the two levels. There's that discretionary, like the grants or the loans, which are a little bit more like a contest, like a dog and pony show kind of thing. Whereas you end up in a scenario where you're getting these investment tax credits, and the government's really made an effort, at least as they're trying to make this effort, to bring out sort of that legislated aspect so that people know that cash is there if they make that investment. And I know, Pierre-Luc, you've really spent time in the past sort of financing, labor and manufacturing tax credits in different provinces and across the country and in the U.S. What's different about these that we should be considering? These investment tax credits with the clean economy ITCs versus some of the traditional ones that are out there.
With regards to financing these projects and these projects generating these tax credits, three things. Okay, so first of all is the lack of track record. If there were a good track record on these major energy transition projects, and especially driven by tax credits or tax incentives, this panel would not be there today, right? So as lenders, we have to accept that we have to reconsider the underwriting strategies on how to finance an industry, a type of project that has a lack of track record. Track record in terms of who are the best suppliers, what are the supply chain problems, what are the difficulties around the different materials, what are the technologies that will be useless in a couple of years because it's evolving so fast. First thing. Second thing is the equity proportion that will be put in these projects. As I said earlier, the very concept of putting forward tax credits, very generous tax incentives towards energy transition projects, is to lower the equity input on each product in order to attract a large number of projects. But by decreasing the amount of equity on each of these projects, it changes the way how a lender can see how the capital structure is built, how this project could be then added with debt, and how this project has a foreseeable future, how this will generate a success, and how I will get paid, right? Yeah. So that's the second thing. And the last thing is we need to change and we need to improve the financial parameters, the underwriting strategies to provide more debt at the onset of these projects. We cannot continue with the same pattern of there's some equity that is coming way afterward, and then it just goes along. Because the tax credits, in order to make sense, it needs to be a refund. Yeah. Tax credits will get in some 18, 24, 36 months after the expenditures are made. If we want to make sure that we lower the amount of equity in each project, we need to add the debt at the onset of these projects. And this is not a simple thing to do. I want to say that at Finalta Capital, we did figure out some good techniques about that. But this is, and the overall financial system has to improve itself to bring more debt to these projects from the get-go.
Yeah, I'll just add, so I agree. I'll just be a little defender of Ottawa for 10 seconds. The reason, contrasting what I said earlier, but I think the reason, it's a very good point, but if you are sitting at the cabinet, forget the political party involved, right? But if you're sitting at the cabinet, the last thing you want is to vote for something that gives companies this money right away, and then you have nothing to show for, right? Like that's really what they're afraid of, that this is going to be the headline on the Globe and Mail front page, that we've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars and we have very little to show for, right? Hence why they're saying, go meet these conditions, buy this equipment, then after you're going to get this credit. And so there is a time period that this needs to sort of flush itself through. And then the second point I would add is that, so that's of course the federal perspective, right? But the second point I would say is for the lenders, it is challenging, right? Because there is no track record here. And so now you have a company X coming to a bank or to a lender and saying, I need 100 million or whatever to finance this project, right? And I believe I meet these conditions. So I'm going to get from Ottawa some 30% credit back, right? 30 million bucks. So can I collateralize that? Can I monetize it somehow? Can a bank, can a lender rely on that incoming receivable? Like that becomes a question, right? And who's going to diligence this properly, that you're going to believe that this company is going to meet those labor requirements, for example, that it has met the conditions for this credit, that it has bought eligible property, and there are all kinds of technical, scientific, if you will, engineering conditions for these credits that none of us are qualified to talk about. But in any event, you have to go through all of these tests to say, okay, yeah, I believe that Schwartz has met these conditions and should get this 30% credit back. And so on that basis, I'm going to lend him 100 million, right? These are the challenges that these lenders have. And then, of course, if you're from a lender perspective, you want to get paid first. You know, your loan needs to be repaid first. And then, so contractually, you have to be careful how this is drafted so that the lender gets paid first, and then whatever is left over gets distributed to the investors, right? But anyway, there are quite a few challenges with this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that you touched on a few really important things. I think the need for engineering expertise to kind of look at this, engineering and science expertise, especially with the certainty around some of the tax credits, like the structure. I mean, most of fixed assets, almost all, you claim the depreciation when it's available for use, so it sort of aligns with some of those things. But I mean, there's a sort of that broader angle now, looking at the individual businesses themselves. And Jeff, I wanted to ask you sort of, what do you think that the government could do to really help move these credits into the right hands at the right time and as quickly as possible.
Yeah, look, I'm a big believer that, and it's not anti-government, and this isn't against Ottawa, but I do find whether it's federal or provincial, the systems that are in place and the tools that they're using seem 20 years old. Whereas you have companies that are, whether it's a bank or whether it's Wealthsimple, that seem to find ways to do things very quickly. And so one of the issues or one of the challenges that I think we have with ITCs is simplifying the process, because I don't have the opportunity. We did a project recently with a very large a large real estate developer, but for the most part, they're smaller businesses. They don't navigate the system well. They're confused, and they're not willing to take a risk up front in something they're doing without more assurances. So for me, I feel from not just an ITC perspective, but from an overall legislative framework and from access to credits, I think we have to think as consumers. I think we have to think as end users, and there are an entire industry, you saw an Apple announcement where it's making it easier for users. I still find this both cumbersome, difficult to use. We spoke with 3 customers this week just on, again, this is the incentive side, but the $125,000 help program in Toronto is almost unusable for most users because they can't navigate the system. So back to your point, it's a little bit judgmental, but I do think you can create tools, you can create infrastructure and process in place with technology that helps navigate a system better for large businesses and consumers. And I think we're missing a lot of that today, which creates confusion and complexity in something that could be done simpler. A little bit controversial, but just an opinion of one.
That makes sense. I mean, anytime you can improve or sharpen the process, the better, right? For all of us, for the population, for the companies, for the lenders, borrowers. So I think that's a good point.
Pierre-Luc, anything to add on that? I feel.
Well, you just have to. I think there's not enough a good distinction between the incentives more for the individuals or the small businesses and for the bigger projects. And I tend to agree with you. At some point, you cannot ask an individual to try to get a loan with all his or take all this the small money that he has to try to do something and maybe get a refund. Well, while he's just trying to be a sub part of this great energy transition. I totally agree with you. But for the major projects, I think the accountability is extremely important. And if we want to have not only major projects to start in Canada, but to generate yield for all the taxpayers and to generate revenues, they must be held accountable for not just starting the projects and getting a refund on the capital expenditures that they put forward, but these projects, they must work. The product themselves must be sold, and we must generate profits and corporate tax for that. And making the process too accessible for these major projects, they would not take enough risk, and therefore would not have enough skin in the game. A bit contradictory of what I said before, but not having enough skin in the game to really put their best effort forward to generating a success with these projects. And I think we need to keep this accountability part for these more of like bigger projects.
Yeah, for sure. On that point, I always have some points, but there's a recapture element that I think we should mention here, which is part of this accountability, okay? So if you claim this credit, any one of the few credits that we have, and on a future audit, the government says, well, you have not met the conditions as you claimed, okay? Then they can claim the money back, hence the so-called
but Dan,
recapture element.
I need to jump on that.
Yeah, go.
The recapture rules are more theoretical than anything, because at some point, if the project is not working, you know how it is. You discussed about structuring to begin the conversation.
Yeah.
And if the project is made into a partnership, everything goes down, everything goes south.
Yeah.
The project is not going anymore.
Yeah.
What are you going to recapture?
Well,
nothing.
Well, it depends. I can't believe I'm Ottawa today. But if I'm the feds, right? Like, I will find a way to go after you, right? Like, I will audit your partners of that partnership. I will audit different parties, right? Like, so, because again, put yourself in Ottawa's shoes, right? Like, this country cannot just give the money.
I agree.
And then not test it, audit it later, right? Yeah. Because then I will fill out some form today and say I am eligible. And if there's no audit accountability mechanism, right, then the government doesn't get anything back. It's just like your typical tax return. When you file your tax return, they audit you periodically and they say, I don't know about this deduction. Let's have a chat, and then you may have to pay some money back. That's really what this is. Now, from a lender's perspective, again, like if I'm lending money to an entity, to a partnership, to a corporation where I suspect there may be some recapture because I'm not quite convinced that the conditions had been met, then I'm going to think twice as to how much I'm going to lend to that entity, right? Like, so it becomes right? And it will be a contractual issue, right? Like, you will probably, if you buy into some project 2 years later, right? I would tell you, well, make sure that there's a clause in that purchase agreement that says that if there is some recapture, that it's not going to be on you, it's going to be on the partner which exited, right? So there will be some contractual legal mechanism here that will have to be sort of implemented.
Right.
And then I forgot my second point. Oh, right. Sorry. My second point was going to be, and I'll just finish on this, is that we need to, if we really believe in this, we need to extend the timelines by which these credits have to be generated, because right now, when you look at the legislation, they're phased out after 2034.
Right.
So again, the feds are basically saying, you got to do this now, right? Because if you do this now, albeit we wasted 2 or 3 years passing this through Parliament, but we have to do it quickly if you want to get these credits because they're being phased out. Possible that they will get extended, but we don't know.
Right, and we have 49 seconds left, but who thought tax was this interesting, eh? Like, it's awesome. I love tax. I'm going to end this with a last thought. I'm going to pass it over to Jeff to sort of start. What do we anticipate going forward? We talked about extending the tax credits. How do you think that the government can really help implement, measures that will help us transition?
Yeah, look, I'm going to say the same thing. Transparency and simplification of tools. I'm looking at it lower down in the food chain. So I think the more the smaller players can access, and I agree we need accountability, but we also need to move faster. We have so many consumers and so many small businesses asking to move down this path. And I think we need to help chart that with government and with our partners to make it go faster and simpler for them.
Fantastic. Pierre-Luc?
I think, and just to get back a bit on the recapture, I think we talk about the sticks, but on the carrot side, yes, the refund for the capital expenditures is a good thing. What I would like to see is how we could also encourage generating more profits from these projects, not just getting them up off the ground, but seeing tax incentives trying to incentivize the success of these projects.
Fantastic.
I would like to see that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Dan?
I would just say, based on today, I hope there's more communication with the feds, frankly. It sounds like we still need more two-way communication here. Yeah. And I think that can perhaps improve some of these glitches that we are seeing.
Absolutely. And with that, thank you all. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us today.